The mechanical whine pierced the heavy afternoon silence again, a metallic insect slicing through the heavy air, hovering just out of reach above my backyard. I whipped my head toward the noise, my fists clenching involuntarily, the summer heat, making my skin sticky with anger. The damn drone was back, its tiny black body almost invisible against the blinding sun, its little red lights blinking mockingly as it zipped lower, close enough that I could almost make out the reflection of my own furious face on its glossy surface. It wasn't the first time, not even the 10th. For weeks now, this sneaky little machine had been floating over my fence, hovering around my windows, peeking down into my private moments like some vile, mechanical peeping Tom. At first, I had told myself it was random. Kids playing, maybe. A delivery gone wrong. But that excuse had worn thin fast. The way it moved wasn't playful. It was calculated, invasive, patient. It wasn't there for a quick look. It wanted something, and I knew exactly who was behind it. Across the street, behind his neat rows of hydrangeas and his precious bird bath, Mr. Reynolds, Ted Reynolds, 45 years old, bachelor by choice if you asked him, creepy by necessity. If you asked anyone else, sat behind his bay window, pretending to read his newspaper while the slight curve of his mouth betrayed him. I had caught him watching before, staring when he thought I wasn't looking. Eyes too cold, too still. This wasn't curiosity anymore. It was an obsession. The last shred of tolerance inside me snapped. I stormed back inside, slamming the sliding door so hard that the glass rattled in its frame, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I wasn't going to play defense anymore. If he wanted a show, I'd give him one he couldn't forget. I tore through the closet under the stairs, throwing aside boxes and forgotten umbrellas until my hand closed around the heavy metal base of the industrial-grade spotlight I had bought months ago for a backyard party that never happened. It was big, ugly, and blindingly bright. Perfect. Dragging it out into the yard, I wrestled with the thick black cord, threading it through the cracked door back into the house, plugging it into the nearest outlet with a savage shove. The drone bobbed closer, almost curious now, its camera lens glinting like a cold black eye. I smiled a slow, dangerous smile, a thrill of fury making my hands steady. He had poked the bear for the last time. I angled the spotlight up, aiming it straight at his second-story window, that smug little alcove where he perched like some fat spider weaving invisible webs. The lamp was heavy, almost too much for me to lift alone, but rage gave me strength, and after a moment of struggle, I locked it into place, pointing it like a weapon. With a jerk, I slammed the switch. The beam roared to life, a supernova of white-hot light ripping across the street and slamming full force into his bedroom. Curtains illuminated like X-rays, walls melting into translucent sheets, every inch of his private space exposed to the world. I watched with grim satisfaction as his figure staggered into view, hands flying up to shield his face, his precious newspaper fluttering to the floor like a dying bird. He scrambled, slipping on the polished wooden floor, crashing into furniture with an awkward, panicked grace. For the first time, he was the one being watched. He was the one stripped bare. I wanted him to feel it, the way he had made me feel, powerless, humiliated, raw. I cranked the lamp higher, the motor inside it whining louder, the heat curling. Off the bulb, like a living thing. He tried to yank the curtains closed, but the light punched through the thin fabric, outlining his frantic movements in sharp, pitiless detail. Neighbors began to drift out of their homes, drawn by the commotion, blinking and shading their eyes against the sudden artificial sunrise erupting in the middle of our quiet street. Whispers started, the kind that slither and grow, twisting into something uglier and far more permanent. I saw Mrs. Langley from 2 doors down murmur something to her husband, pointing up at Ted's window, her expression caught between disgust and glee. For once, I wasn't the one hiding. I wasn't the one being whispered about. I was the executioner, the judge, the jury, and the damn spectacle, and God. it felt good. Ted stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of his bed, crashing hard onto the floor with a muffled yell that I could almost hear across the street. The drone jerked upward in a panic, buzzing away like a kicked hornet, but I didn't let up. The light stayed pinned to his window, a merciless, unwavering eye, and I stood next to it like a monument to vengeance, my arms folded, daring him to try something. He scrambled to his feet, sweating, panicked, his face twisting into something ugly and desperate. For a brief, raw second, our eyes locked across the distance. His mouth opened, some pitiful protest forming, but he was too late. The damage was already done. More neighbors had come out now, some clutching their phones, recording, documenting, immortalizing his disgrace one shaky video clip at a time. I could almost see the headlines forming in their minds. Local man exposed, spying on neighbor. A digital guillotine descending with the same inevitability as my spotlight's brutal glare. Ted tore the curtains off the rod in a mad frenzy, trying to tangle himself in darkness, but it was hopeless. The flood of light made every action desperate, every flailing movement a grotesque pantomime of guilt. I could feel the laughter building. Around me, a rising tide of cruel satisfaction from the people he had always watched but never spoken to, judged but never helped. I let the spotlight burn a little longer, searing his shame into every bystander's memory, branding it into the concrete of our tidy little street. Finally, when he had collapsed against the far wall, shielding his face like a criminal caught. In a police raid, I leaned over and snapped off the switch. Silence slammed down, heavy and awkward, as the sun of my rage vanished, leaving only the grim, embarrassed twilight. Ted's window was a gaping black hole now, the shredded remnants of curtains flapping weakly in the warm breeze. I stood there, breathing hard, my pulse hammering in my ears, the ghost of the spotlight's heat still clinging to my skin. A few neighbors shifted awkwardly, unsure whether to applaud or retreat. Some didn't even bother hiding their smirks. Mrs. Langley actually clapped, 3 sharp, sarcastic slaps that cracked through the silence like gunshots. Ted didn't come back to the window. He didn't dare. Slowly, deliberately, I unplugged. The spotlight, coiling the thick cord around my arm like a victorious gladiator gathering his weapon. I didn't glance around for approval. I didn't need it. Every stare, every murmured comment, every camera still trained on Ted's window was enough. As I hauled the spotlight back into the house, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in the sliding door, a figure outlined in the last dying rays of the day, eyes dark, mouth set in a grim, satisfied line. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had taken my life back from the crawling, unseen fear that had poisoned every corner of my home. He thought he could turn me into prey. He thought wrong. Inside, I leaned the spotlight against the wall, the metal still radiating faint waves of heat. My hands trembled now that the adrenaline was wearing off, but I didn't care. Let him sit in the darkness of his ruined privacy. Let him stew in the consequences he thought he'd never face. Tomorrow, I thought, sipping a glass of water with shaking fingers. Tomorrow would be even worse for him. Because I wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The night wrapped around the neighborhood like a heavy, suffocating shroud. But I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching Ted's darkened house like a hunter waiting for the wounded animal to stir. Every so often, I saw a twitch of movement, his silhouette pacing, stopping, peeking through the shredded curtain scraps like a rat trapped in a burning cage. I didn't feel pity. I felt a grim, hungry satisfaction that only sharpened with every minute that dragged by. He was finally feeling it. The helplessness, the humiliation, the crawling paranoia he had inflicted on me night after night with his whirring little spies. No more games, no more pretending. We both knew what he was, and now so did everyone else. At dawn, I went outside with a bucket of thick, sticky industrial glue and a stack of the brightest, ugliest fluorescent pink poster boards I could find. The The street was still mostly asleep, but that only made it better. Quietly, methodically, I plastered Ted's telephone pole, his mailbox, even the front of his precious hydrangea beds with signs that screamed in bold black letters, "Warning, drone pervert lives here." The glue stuck like sin, soaking into the wood, the metal, the petals, impossible to scrape off without taking chunks of everything with it. I nailed a few extra signs to public posts around the block for good measure, using thick, rusted nails that I knew would tear and splinter anything that tried to pry them down. By the time the neighborhood began to stir, by the time the morning dog walkers shuffled onto the sidewalks, blinking blearily into the early light, my work was done. I stood across the street, arms folded, watching as the first gasps and muffled snickers spread like a virus. Ted's name hissed through the air like smoke, accusations wrapped in laughter, in disgust, in the kind of moral outrage that people love to gorge themselves on. Ted himself didn't come out. His front door stayed bolted shut, his windows stayed dark. But I knew he was inside, listening, trembling, shrinking. I wanted him to feel trapped, hunted, helpless, every second of every hour. I wanted him to rot in the same miserable tension he had marinated me in. Around noon, a black SUV with dark-tinted windows rolled up and idled in front of his house. Two men in crisp, pressed suits stepped out, their movements sharp and efficient, their faces unreadable behind dark glasses. They didn't knock. They didn't ask. They walked straight up and slapped a heavy, official-looking envelope onto Ted's front door with a thick strip of yellow evidence tape. I couldn't hear the exact words, but it wasn't hard to guess. Maybe one of the neighbors had called the police after all. Maybe someone had forwarded one of those videos from last night to the local news. It didn't matter how it started. The avalanche was already roaring down the mountain, and Ted was tied to the tracks with nowhere to run. He cracked open the door just an inch, enough to snatch the envelope before slamming it shut again. His face, pale, sweaty, haunted, flickered for a fraction of a second in the gap. That was all I needed. I smiled, slow, deliberate, predatory. This was only the beginning. That night, I set up the spotlight again. I didn't even bother hiding it. I dragged it right onto my front lawn, aimed it at his house like a lighthouse warning ships away from a cursed shore, and left it humming there, a silent, blinding accusation cutting through the darkness. This time, I didn't even stay outside to watch. I didn't need to. I sat back in my living room, lights off, curtains open, letting the glow seep around me like a protective halo. I poured myself a drink, the ice clinking softly in the glass, and waited for the next move, because Ted Reynolds had declared war when he sent that first drone over my fence, and I was just getting warmed up. The night dragged on, thick and heavy, the spotlight's beam slicing across the street in a perfect, merciless line. His house sat there like a wounded animal under a hunter's gaze, the windows shuttered, the door locked, every inch of it, screaming fear. I sipped my drink slowly, savoring the bitterness, letting it mix with the sweet, raw taste of victory blooming in my chest. It wasn't long before Ted cracked again. Around midnight, the door creaked open and he slipped out, hunched and frantic, a trash bag clutched in one trembling hand. He thought he could sneak past the light, slink down the driveway into the shadows, erase the evidence of whatever he was hiding. But the spotlight found him instantly, bathing him in ruthless white fire, illuminating every guilty twitch of his muscles, every darting glance of his bloodshot eyes. I watched him freeze, caught like a rat in a trap, the black bag dangling limply from his hand. His shoulders sagged as if the weight of the world had finally dropped onto his back all at once. For a long moment, he just stood there, sagging under the intensity of the stare he could no longer escape. The bag slipped from his fingers, hitting the driveway with a soft, wet thud that made my stomach twist. Papers spilled out, photos, printouts, Grim little trophies of God knew how many hours of secret watching. Faces, windows, bodies outlined in grainy black and white. Some of them were mine. Most of them weren't. My lip curled in disgust. The neighbors, emboldened now, began to drift closer, a slow, pulsing crowd gathering like sharks scenting blood. Flashlights bobbed. Murmurs grew louder. Someone called out his name in a jeering tone, and he flinched as if the words had struck him physically. Ted tried to gather the papers, scrabbling at them with clumsy, desperate hands, but it was too late. Phones snapped photos, recorded videos, immortalizing his disgrace frame by frame. Every second he spent crawling on the ground, begging under the white-hot scrutiny of my spotlight, was a second deeper into his own personal hell. Finally, he gave up. He just sat there, slumped over the trash bag like a broken marionette, his head bowed low, his entire body radiating defeat. He was finished, and he knew it. I rose from my chair, leaving the glass half empty on the table, and stepped out onto the porch. My shadow loomed huge behind me, cast by the giant light, stretching across the street and falling over him like a judge's robe. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Ted lifted his head, his eyes hollow, his mouth working soundlessly. Some pitiful plea he didn't have the strength to voice. He was a man unmade, a crawling thing stripped of all dignity, all pretense. And I turned, slowly, deliberately, and went back inside. I left the spotlight burning all night, a beacon to anyone who cared to look, a monument to his downfall. The next morning, a city truck rolled up and workers nailed a bright orange notice to his door. Condemned pending investigation. By noon, he was gone. I watched from behind my curtain as he loaded the last of his belongings into the back of a battered pickup truck, his head down, his movements stiff and joyless. No one helped him. No one said goodbye. He didn't even look back. He peeled out of the neighborhood like a wounded animal fleeing the hunter, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of his reputation and the lingering stench of his sickness. The drone never came back. The whispers faded over time, replaced by newer, fresher gossip. But Ted's name stayed poisoned forever, a warning stitched into the fabric of the neighborhood like a bloodstain that wouldn't wash out. And me? I slept soundly every night, the sliding doors wide open, the breeze brushing against my skin, no longer afraid, no longer hunted. Because sometimes when the wolves come for you, you have to become something even worse, something they can never face again, and God help them if they ever forget it.